Andy Mitchell thought he'd hit rock bottom fresh out of prison, homeless and desperate. Then he met her, Elizabeth Morgan, a wealthy widow with a shocking proposal. A sham marriage. A place to live. A second chance. It seemed like salvation. It was a death sentence. Because Elizabeth wasn't just any old woman. She was a black widow, a predator who'd buried more husbands than headstones. And Andy? He was about to become her latest victim. But this time, the spider had caught the wrong fly. Let us know where you're watching from and what time you found this video. Andy Mitchell was a survivor from the beginning of history. As he was growing up in the chilly and impersonal corridors of St. Vincent's orphanage, he quickly realized that the world did not provide favors to those who approached it. At the age of 16, he was living on the streets, and by the time he was 22, he was doing 4 long years in prison for a botched robbery of a grocery store. This was a crime that he would never have undertaken if his desperation hadn't impaired his judgment. The harshness of reality has finally set in. 2 weeks after his release, ex-convicts were sought by no one. The applications disappeared into thin air. The interviews concluded with stoic grins and hollow promises, and the little amount of money that he had managed to put together was running out. As a result, he found himself in the Rusty Nail, where he was sipping his second whiskey and pondering whether or not he would be sleeping beneath a bridge by the time daylight arrived. At that moment, she entered the room. Elizabeth Morgan was a picture of old-world elegance. She wore a lavender dress with pearls draped over it. Her silver hair was done up precisely, and her piercing blue eyes scanned the room like a hawk. As soon as those eyes focused on Andy, a gentle grin that conveyed her understanding curved her lips. Then, as she slipped into the seat next to him, she whispered, "Dear." And then she said, "I believe you can help me." Andy wore a frown. "Ma'am?" She drew in closer, the aroma of rose perfume and something more sinister clinging to her, something like mothballs and secrets. "I need a husband." Andy was on the verge of choking on his drink. A sound that resembled wind chimes in a home that was vacant was Elizabeth's laughter. "Oh, that is not the case, my darling. It is just on paper. Take a look at my family. They are troublesome. Those individuals would crowd my estate like vultures if I were to perish away. But if I'm already married," her nails were tapped on the glass as she did so, "everything goes to my beloved spouse." Andy felt his heart rate accelerate, a place to lay his head down. Stop looking for work now. There will be no more hunger. With some trepidation, he said, "What's in it for me?" "Room and board," she said clearly. "There is a monthly expenditure budget of $1,000 when I am no longer here, as a thoughtful token of farewell." It sounded like it was too fantastic to exist. Nevertheless, Andy had no other choices. Elizabeth took him into the Gothic monster that was the house on Willow Lane, which included turrets, walls that were strangled with ivy, and a front door that moaned like an animal that was about to die. Crystal chandeliers, oil paintings with eyes that followed you, and a grandfather clock that chimed half a second too slowly were some of the treasures that could be found within the building, which was like a museum. Beginning with the first few days, Andy took on the role of the obedient husband. He was the one who carried Elizabeth's groceries, repaired a faucet that was leaking, and put up with her inquisitive and pointed inquiries about his history. Then, however, he became aware of some facts. The method in which she observed him, the manner in which she counted her plates and cutlery after supper. Every night, she would lock the door to her bedroom in this manner. Finally, there is the money. It all began with a safe that was left open in her study, which contained piles of cash, diamond brooches, and bearer bonds. Those fingers of Andy's itched. $1,000 each month was a pittance in comparison to it. During the course of one day, Andy made his move while Elizabeth was participating in her weekly bridge game. The safe was emptied, a duffel bag was loaded with all he could possibly carry, and he made a break for it en route to the airport. Liberation. It was the gate where the police were waiting. His wrists were quickly shackled with handcuffs before he had a chance to blink. Andy Mitchell, according to the law enforcement official, you're under arrest for theft and suspected involvement in the disappearance of Elizabeth Morgan's last 3 husbands. It seemed as if Andy's blood had frozen. What? The cop gave a sly grin. Did you really think you were the first? Around the time that they were dragging him away, Andy got a glimpse of a lavender outfit that he had seen before in the throng. Elizabeth stood there, the same knowing grin she had been beaming all along, and she raised her gloved hand in a mocking little wave. After that, she never returned. The court proceeding was a farce. Andy was portrayed by the prosecution as a ruthless former criminal, but the true horror came when they disclosed that there were additional duffel bags that were similar to the one that was discovered buried in Elizabeth's garden. Each carried the personal belongings of a guy who had gone missing, the generous parting gift that Andy gave, the sentence of life. As for Elizabeth Morgan, what about her? Never again was she seen by anybody. It is said that she relocated to Europe. Other people have rumors that she is still out there, hunting for husband number 5 while drinking whiskey in a pub with low lighting. Andy Mitchell was incarcerated and sat in his cell, gazing at the paint that was flaking off the walls. He was reliving every moment of his catastrophic marriage to Elizabeth Morgan. When he attempted to explain, "She set me up." The police officers laughed at him. The evidence was too strong to refute the claim that she had done this previously. There were his fingerprints all over the items that had been taken, and for Elizabeth, her heart was devastated by the treachery of her criminal husband. And she was nothing more than a charming old widow. The next thing you know, a guest showed up. A snapshot was pushed across the table by a lawyer who was dressed in a sharp suit. Recognize this? Andy's stomach sank to the floor. Elizabeth, but in her younger years, was standing next to a guy whose face had been featured in the media for a number of years. It was Vincent Crowe, one billionaire who had disappeared 10 years ago, taking with him not just his riches, but also a string of spouses who had passed away. The attorney said that Elizabeth Morgan was not the client's genuine name. "It's Lillian Crowe," she said. "This is Vincent's wife." It's not the first time she's framed a guy, for that matter. Andy's thoughts were all over the place. "Why tell me this?" The attorney leaned in closer. "Because what we want is her. Moreover, you are going to assist us in capturing her." Compassionate grounds were the reason they freed Andy. It was a sham funeral for a fictitious relative named Andy. It was not a cemetery that he was going to see. They were going to go hunting. Lizzie, sometimes known as Lillian, had a pattern. She took advantage of guys who were in a dire situation, enticed them with assurances of safety, and then framed them when they became greedy. However, she never failed to save mementos. Andy had a good idea of where to look for them. Through the cover of darkness, he broke into her previous residence. The safe was still there, despite the fact that the area was dust-covered and vacant. What about the interior? As a ledger, the names, the dates, quantities. Robert Hayes is the first husband. Nothing was seen. Inherited $2 million. David Poole is the second husband, holding a person. Passed away while incarcerated. Mark Vey is the third husband. Fall was accidental. Andy Mitchell is the fourth husband. Proven guilty. And last, a new entry may be seen at the bottom. Thomas Wren is the fifth husband. We are awaiting engagement. Andy's blood became somewhat icy. Already, she was planning to move on. Andy followed her to a luxurious cruise ship called the Ophelia's Dream, where Lillian, who was now going by the name Eleanor Sinclair, was engaging in a romantic relationship with a retired judge. Thomas Wren was completely unprepared for it. Andy addressed her as they were standing on the railing of the ship with the water raging below them. "You have completely ruined my life," he growled. and Lillian didn't even flinch once. "No, my sweetheart. The instant you took from me, you created a disaster for your own." Then she did something that wasn't anticipated. She flashed a grin and then leaped. When the team finally made it to the sea, she had already disappeared. There is no one. There is no trace. Any and all accusations against Andy were dropped. His innocence was shown by the ledger, which also laid bare Lillian's decades-long deception. However, as he stood on the deck of the Ophelia's Dream and watched the waves consume the horizon, he became aware of the reality of the situation. It was still possible to find her. Another guy who was in a dire situation was being enchanted by a widow with silver hair elsewhere. Additionally, another safe was being stuffed with stolen items at some other location. It seemed that the ledger was being updated with the addition of a new name. Is that Andy? The ledger was maintained by him. In the event that she ever found her way back, Andy was unable to let go of the case even after the police had closed it. When he held the ledger in his hands, it burned like a live creature. Each name was like a ghost, and each dollar number was like a scream. He spent restless evenings reading over its pages, tracking Lillian's movements over decades. He was intrigued by the subject matter. After that, he discovered it a pattern that no one else had ever seen before. On a 7-year interval, she made a strike once every 7 years. The year 2005's Robert Hayes. The year 1992's Daniel Poole. It was Marcus Vey. In 1999, it was Andy Mitchell. In 2006, 2013 year of Thomas Wren. The dates were arranged precisely like tombstones. In other words, means she had arrived. Andy had an unhealthy preoccupation with men. Due to the fact that the state had granted him a pitiful sum for unjust detention, he liquidated what little he had and purchased a ticket to Nice that was only for one direction. At that point, the ledger included the last transaction, which was the acquisition of a villa under the name Delphine Laurent. The sun was beating down on Andy as he viewed the home via binoculars while he was on the French Riviera. There was nothing for 3 days. After that, on the 4th morning, a chuckle that was familiar to me drifted on the air from the sea. It was black hair that she had colored. She walked in a different manner. Nevertheless, those eyes that were icy blue and calculated, were the same we had Lillian present. She was not alone herself. A guy with silver hair who was in his early 60s and whose Rolex was sparkling clutched her arm as they went down the seafront. To know the following. Andy did not have to consult the ledger. Husband 6. Andy followed them to a cafe, his heart beating rapidly the whole time. He had the option of going to the police, but what evidence did he have? A ledger that has been stolen? A word from a former criminal? No, this has come to an end. At the same time that Mark was leaving to use the toilet, Andy slipped into the seat that was unoccupied. At the sight of him, Lillian's grin became ice cold. When she stirred her tea, she said, "You look very good. Prison agrees with you." On the table, Andy positioned the ledger himself. "It ends today." A razor wrapped in silk was what Lillian's chuckle sounded like. "Don't be such a theatrical person, my sweetheart. There is no evidence in that book. Furthermore, even if it did." She indicated the direction of the bathroom with a nod. It was Henry, who worked as a prosecutor. "Do you really imagine that he would believe you rather than me?" A gleam in her eye sent all of the information to Andy. Henry was not only a false witness. Rather, he was the ideal alibi. On that particular evening, Andy broke into Lillian's home. At this point, he was aware of what he needed to search for: the concealed safe, the fake paperwork, and the poison concealed beneath the aspirin. Now, however, Lillian was waiting. Her grip on the rifle did not waver at any point. "I knew you'd come," she moaned. "I was right. Men, just as you routinely do. It is impossible to leave well enough alone. Andy wore a grin. Neither can you. The shot never really came out. Handcuffs in hand, Henry emerged from the shadows instead of attempting to escape. When asked, "Lillian Crow," he said, "or should I say Delphine? Over the course of 20 years, Interpol has been searching for you." Suddenly, Lillian's cheeks became pink. That ledger was thrown to Henry by Andy. "Told you she keeps souvenirs." The trial was reported on prominently across the world. A total of 3 corpses were discovered by forensic specialists in the garden of the villa. Investigations led to offshore accounts that held millions of dollars thanks to the codes in the ledger. Andy was able to see everything from a cafe in Marseille, where he was drinking espresso while the Mediterranean was sparkling. A newspaper was open in front of him, and it had a photograph of a young heiress and her elderly fiancé that was featured on the society page. It was written in the caption, "Wedding of the season." Andy looked around at the grin of the future wife. Far too sharp, knowing too much. He made a move to grab his phone. It would be beneficial for Interpol to be aware of this. In the end, the game does not really come to an end.